Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just letting everyone in. It'll just be a moment. We have a pretty full house tonight, which is so exciting. So come on in. Feel free to have your cameras on or off, whatever feels the most comfortable. I know our panelists will probably love to see you tonight. So whatever you feel like doing, you do you. So we're just letting people in. Just one more moment. I think most of you probably saw we are recording this program. It's a free program, so it will be available on our website, on the MOFAD website, no paywall or anything, right on the event page. If you go through our programming calendar, you'll be able to find it again. Okay, letting all you in. So welcome everyone. Hello, hello. Happy end of June. My name is Sari Kamen. I'm the Public Programs Director of MOFAD. Hi, Erin. I saw that wave. For those of you that don't know MOFAD, we are the Museum of Food and Drink. We are based in New York City. We have been virtual for a very long time now, well over a year. Hopefully, sooner than later, starting in the fall at some point, we will be doing some in-person programs again. If you're in New York City or visiting New York City, we would of course be so happy to see you. We will still be doing virtual programs, and just a huge thank you to everyone for coming tonight. If you've been to MOFAD programs the past year, it's just been amazing to have you all in community virtually. We're so grateful for your support. If you're not in New York, we will keep showing up for you virtually, I promise. And we will, figure out this new hybrid way of doing programs, which is very exciting. I don't want to say too much. I just want to thank Kitchen Arts and Letters for being our partner tonight. They are behind the scenes normally, being our wonderful book partner for any cookbook event we do, really, and that's been happening for months. They're the absolute best bookstore for cookbooks in New York City. You must go if you're here or visiting. I'm so happy you get to actually see one of their wonderful representatives tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura Jackson, who's going to welcome you and also pass it over to our panelists. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you're staying cool. I appreciate you being here and hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Sari. It's so awesome to be here as part of one of the events instead of secretly behind the scenes packing all your books and shipping them off to you. My name is Laura. I'm here to thank you all for being here on behalf of Kitchen Arts and Letters. If you're not familiar with us, we are a bookstore focusing on food and drink in New York City. That means cookbooks, wine books, home brewing books, food history, all of it. Anything that has to do with food and drink, that's what we love. And we import from all over the world. We love to showcase anything that's new or interesting, and sometimes things that otherwise would not have a huge platform. And it's truly an honor to be here at this event. I was so fortunate to be in the mix when Vaughn Diaz came to us and had this brilliant idea for a conversation that is obvious that should be happening, and so wonderful to be a part of this and to have helped make it happen. This online programming is really helping us stay relevant and stay alive through the pandemic. We weren't used to being digital as a bookstore. We are a little bit analog, so this has been really awesome for us to keep things fun and festive. So I'm going to introduce to you our host tonight, Alejandra Ramos. She is a television host. You might recognize her from the Today Show, where she is a contributor, chef and food writer, known for creative recipes and entertaining ideas that are playful, improvisational, and always just a little bit extra. In addition to her regular appearances on the Today Show, Alejandra is the creator of the blog alwaysorderdessert.com, which is a motto I live by as well. She's a host on Food Network Kitchen, a chef personality on the cooking channel show Food Fact or Fiction, and a co-host of Today's Deals Lives and At Home Cooking on Amazon Live. Her writing has appeared in numerous publications, including Real Simple, Cosmopolitan, NBCnews.com, Saveur, and the Oprah magazine, plus a million other places. You've probably seen her. Alejandra was born in New York City to Puerto Rican parents. She studied at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. and Apicius International School of Hospitality in Florence, Italy. She lives in Harlem with her husband, their dog, and many, many tropical plants. And I will turn it over to you, Alejandra.
Thank you so much. There are a lot of tropical plants. Well, I'm so excited for this program tonight. When Vaughn brought me this idea and wanted to see if I'd be interested, it was like an instant yes, wanted to jump into the phone and hug her. So I'm so excited, and so excited also to be here with Daniela, who has been one of my Twitter faves for the longest time, and getting to be able to chat and connect as we planned out this evening was such a great honor. So I'm going to introduce both of these fantastic ladies to you, and then we're going to dive in. All right, so start off with Vaughn. Vaughn Diaz is a writer, a documentary producer, and the author of Coconuts and Collards, Recipes and Stories from Puerto Rico to the Deep South. Some of you have purchased your copy. Some of you already have a copy. It is a gorgeous book. If you haven't yet, definitely get your hands on that, and we know what bookstore to get it from. Born in Puerto Rico and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, she explores food, culture, and identity. Her forthcoming book, Islas, Cuisines of Resilience, is scheduled for publication by Chronicle Books in spring 2023, and it explores the cuisines of islands across the globe and the ways they're connected through their use of ancestral cooking techniques. Vaughn gave us a little preview about what she's working on with that book, and another thing that I'm extremely excited about. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, StoryCorps, Food and Wine Magazine, Bon Appetit, among a million other places, because that's what we do, ladies. In addition, she also teaches food studies and oral history at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She currently sits on the board of directors for the Center of Documentary Studies at Duke University and is a member of the Journalism Committee for the James Beard Foundation. Fantastic, fantastic lady. And another fantastic lady is Daniela Galarza, who is a staff writer for the food section of the Washington Post, who also writes Eat Voraciously, the most delicious word, a newsletter offering easy dinner recipes, cooking tips, and inspiration. A former restaurant pastry chef, Galarza has been writing about food and cooking for more than 10 years. Before joining the Post, she was a features editor at Serious Eats, senior editor at Eater.com, and deputy food editor at Los Angeles Magazine. Her work has also been published by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and New York Magazine. Galarza majored in food studies at Cornell University before earning a certificate in pastry arts from the International Culinary Center in New York. Born in Chicago to a Puerto Rican father and Iranian mother, her stories, reporting, and recipes explore food, identity, and representation. Thank you both for being here tonight. So excited to dig in, talk things over. I think we're gonna just dive right into our first question. Vaughn, why don't you tell us about your book, because we know it's fantastic, and also your recent New York Times Puerto Rican Essentials essay.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. I'm so incredibly moved and touched by how many people are in the space. And I need to give some shout outs, and sorry if I'm missing anybody, but because I saw your names come across the screen, Kia, Jamie, Aaron, Reina, Victoria, Ronnie, Eric, Monica, Christina, and Eris. Eris, no creo que estás aquí. And also, y'all, my mom is in the audience. So, Mami, gracias por venir. My mom is like my number one advocate. And again, I'm so touched by this, and I'm so honored to be in this space with these two brilliant humans. And before I get started, I wanted to remind folks that that proceeds from book sales tonight are going to benefit El Departamento de la Comida. And I'll read you their statement from their website, which is that El Departamento de la Comida de Puerto Rico is a nonprofit collective that acts as an alternative agency in support of small-scale, decentralized local food projects. Their two-program model of a resource library with tools, seeds, and educational materials, and a kitchen with product making equipment, renewable energy, and a retail point of sale allows them to support food sovereignty through shared resources, exchange of labor and knowledge, and food in all its forms. Sorry, if you wouldn't mind just dropping a link to the donation page also for El Departamento. I encourage y'all to learn about them, to consider contributing, and there are a handful of books left that are signed that will also go to benefit El Departamento de la Comida. You'll need to purchase them directly from Kitchen Arts and Letters. Alejandra, What did you ask me? Yes. Okay. So my cookbook, Coconuts and Collards, and it's really moving to me that my mom is in the audience because she was such an important part of the writing of it. I actually handed her the full manuscript before I handed it to anyone else to make sure that she was okay with all of what was in there, because I share a lot about her life. But ultimately, Coconuts and Collards is a culinary memoir that documents my life living between two places, Puerto Rico and the suburbs outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And what I found as I was writing essays and working through recipes was that it became a book about women. And that shouldn't have been a surprise to me, because I began the project, which I called at the time the Cocina Criolla project, when my grandmother Tata was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and completely lost her ability to cook. So I sort of started out cooking for her so that she could taste food and so that I could capture her taste memory while we still had her on earth. And it sort of sprung into this whole other series of connections between the things that connect the American South to the Caribbean, the legacy of enslavement in both of these places, the tremendous legacy of, oh, you may hear my dog, the tremendous legacy of African cuisines in both of these regions, the influence of indigenous cuisines in these areas. And these narratives just started to flow in and out of each other. And in many ways, growing up in the South helped me better understand the influence and the impact of enslavement on my island, and it helped me understand it differently. So what emerged is Coconuts and Collards, and again, it's a culinary memoir. Each chapter is very different. The first chapter is very, very sort of traditional Puerto Rican. The second chapter is very sort of Puerto Rican Southern fusion, coconut grits, coconut braised collards. The third chapter is difficult. It's a lot about transition and how we make things work. And the fourth chapter will probably make you cry. It was about loss and like finding love again on the island. So that was my book. And in many ways, writing Coconuts and Collards led me down a path to exploring Puerto Rican food through a very different lens. Because of these connections that I started to see between these two places that I was from, it made me really want to dig into Puerto Rican cuisine, the history, the culture, the impact, the intricacies, the specificity, right, of this particular place. And I had the tremendous privilege of being invited to write Puerto Rican Essentials by the New York Times. And I published that article in March. And actually, because of COVID, I had a year to work on it, which is a tremendous privilege. It was originally supposed to be real quick, like sort of 3 months with recipe development, but I had a whole year to work on it. And ultimately, what I discovered through the initial question, right? What are the essential dishes of Puerto Rico? I tested a lot of different things. One thing that is starkly missing from my collection is bacalao, right? Which I actually think is essential to Puerto Rican cuisine. But as I was cooking through the recipes and thinking about how I actually cook from day to day, what are the ingredients that I like to cook? What are the flavors that I enjoy eating? What are dishes that I go back to over and over again? What are dishes that satisfy my taste memory, right? Like, what are the dishes that when I eat them are time portals, right? And so I had this, again, the tremendous privilege of getting to share what I think are 10 essential dishes of our cuisine. It's technically 12 because I also added sofrito and sazon, which I think are essential to our cuisine. I really came away sort of noting the audacity of distilling any culture's cuisine to an essence, right? What is essential to me is not essential to Daniela, is not essential to Alejandra, is not essential to my mother, right? Like we have our own palates, we have our own upbringings, we have our own digestive systems, right? Like what we like to eat and what we like to cook are uniquely ours. And so within that, I think I found a kind of universality within Puerto Rican cuisine that the essential is yours, right? And that we should celebrate that. And I actually wanted to sort of pass this off to Daniela and find out, you know, with your sort of mixed background and growing up in Chicago, What resonated with you about the recipes or what I wrote?
Yeah, no, I remember reading that, remembering when the New York Times published that piece, and I remember just being excited to see it, but then reading how much thought you had put into, you know, you say that these are just essential for you personally, but I actually think the part that resonated with me was that you acknowledged that it was audacious to even consider that a cuisine, any cuisine, could be condensed down into essential dishes or any number of essential dishes. And first, I think that's like where you have to start, and particularly for an island cuisine like Puerto Rico, where colonialism, enslaved Africans, and the American political system has had such an impact on the food there, the food that they're able to grow, the food they're able to buy at the grocery store. I think that you touched on that, and then the recipes that you picked reflected that diversity, reflected the touchstones of what I think of as Puerto Rican cuisine. And it's, you talked about also how it's ever evolving. I think unlike, you could make this argument for any cuisine, as long as the culture is still alive, it's going to continue to evolve, right? Things constantly change. But I do think distinctly different from like Iranian cuisine, which, my mother's from Iran. Like, that is a cuisine that is just centuries old and has its touchstones. And you can, a group of Iranians will argue about what's essential, but they'll kind of come to the same conclusion. And like with Puerto Rican, because the diaspora is so large, and because it's part of the mainland of, America, it's the United States, it's so different for so many different people. And I think Alejandra would probably agree too.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up. And sorry to cut you off, Alejandra, but no. One of the things I think that came through in what you just said, Daniela, is that like Puerto Rican cuisine is American cuisine, right? It is. Puerto Rico has been part of the United States for over 100 years. And so in that way, it was even interesting, right, to be asked to provide essential recipes of my cuisine. It's like, are we going to publish the essential recipes of Detroit? Are we going to publish the essential recipes of Florida? And so I think that there's also something really interesting there in sort of how marked and unmarked categories, right? And the ways in which, even though we acknowledge that Puerto Rico is part of the United States, there's still tension even within our own understandings.
Absolutely. Alejandra, you were going to say something, I think.
No, it was along the same lines of how do you pick what's right? And I think, one thing that we noted in conversations when we were preparing for this was the fact that within, like how you said with Iranians, within ourselves, we all have these sort of arguments, and within a family, we might have these arguments. Like you said that bacalao for you is an essential. I love bacalao. Like, I would give up other things in favor. I would never have a chuleta again if I only could choose bacalao over it. So I think it really kind of, for me, that it would be absolutely be an essential. I need bacalaitos in my life, but yeah, and it's how do you decide what's right, but also it's like it's almost like we've taken on this responsibility just by the nature of taking on this job and this career. Like we're teachers, we are journalists, we're telling stories, but we're also choosing and deciding the stories, and everything that we do, no matter how objective we try to be, is always going to be colored by our own lens and our own experience. And one thing that we talked about too was just about in terms of the limitations that we all grapple with, right? In terms of external limitations, internal limitations, things that we deal with. So I'd love to kind of dig in to see what both of you find are the limitations, any kind of internal versus external pressures about how you choose to tell your stories. Maybe Daniela, you want to start off with this one?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I write this 4-day-a-week newsletter for the Washington Post. You should all subscribe. It just has easy dinner idea recipes and a little story from me Monday through Thursday. And I'm very fortunate in that I work for Joe Yonan as my editor, and I can't imagine Joe ever saying, oh, you need to make this easier, or, oh, I think that ingredient's going to be too hard for someone to find. Let's change it. You know, he's very dedicated to this mission as well. And I remember when I interviewed for the job, I actually sat down with, over Zoom with then executive editor Marty Barron, who asked me what I would bring to the job. And something I said was, I plan on not dumbing down or whitewashing any recipes. It was very important to me that they knew that that was not going to happen, and that if it was if it was an ingredient that was hard to find in the United States, I would certainly provide resources for people. I would give them an explanation. And so I think that that's something I've trying to bring to when I'm writing about Puerto Rican cuisine. You know, I think there are ingredients like ahidilse that you just, it's harder to find. It's not impossible, but it's harder to find. But you can substitute a bell pepper, and it's something that my parents did. You know, it's not an impossible thing. I love that Vaughn has sort of, Saison also, the recipe for Saison also lives on the Washington Post food site. And I just love that this recipe is everywhere because it's a great Saison recipe, but you can also buy Saison in so many places now. And I think that these are the things that I'm trying to bring awareness to. But I think mostly it's just about making sure that what we're doing is representing what we feel is essential about the culture, and also just how we cook at home, which I think is something you mentioned, Alejandra, too, when talking about reading through recipes and how to be efficient in the kitchen, and how, our parents were working parents. They didn't always have time to prep everything in advance. So maybe you can talk about
exactly. Yeah, well, absolutely. I was talking a little bit with you guys, especially since the majority of the work that I do is on camera and it's on television. So for me, the limitations are literally minutes, right? I get 3 to 5 minutes. I took 7 minutes on Monday, and I don't know, they just let me. But it's very, very rare that I get that much time to talk and to explain. And that can be really limiting when you're dealing with recipes that have a much higher learning curve, right? Like I've an example that I bring up a lot is potatoes versus plantains. So if I'm going to do tostones and French fries are essentially the same type of recipe. You peel it, you cut it, you fry it, you salt it. 3 ingredients each. But to describe dealing with the plantain, it takes so much more time because you have to tell people where to find it, how to choose it, how to peel it even. There's all these different aspects of it that are so much more, and that takes up so much time. So it's like we're constantly dealing with this sort of, like we're constantly at a disadvantage to explain these things. And then when you do have these outside limitations, like minutes or inches on a page, then it sort of limits what kind of things you are able to tell, and it limits the stories that you're able to tell. And then it's also the structures, the limitations of structures. So again, when I do a television segment, the structure, for example, on Today's Show is always you list out your ingredients first, and then you go through every single one, and then you dive into the recipe. I always hate that step, and I try to skip it as often as possible because it takes up time, and I don't think it's worth it. I'm not a mise en place kind of girl because that's not how I grew up cooking. I am the sort of person, like you said, like my mom, she puts the oil in the pan, she starts chopping the onion, she throws the onion in the pan, then she moves on to the next ingredient. She doesn't have 18 little bowls with all sorts of little ingredients all spread out. And that's how I like to write my recipes, and that's how I like to teach my recipes. But sometimes you're working with style sheets and established formats in publications or on television that try to kind of limit that, which is such a strange thing to me, because it's like, well, let me tell the story the way that it's meant to be told, not in the structure that you're putting here for me.
Well, and something I heard in what you said, Alejandra, that maybe we'll get to a little later, but I wanted to point it out here, is that one of the limitations is that at least this, I experienced this as a recipe developer, that the pressure is make it quick, make it easy, make it accessible, right? And that just isn't always possible for some of our dishes, for tostones, like you were saying, oil, plantain, right? You just have to know how to treat the plátano. And once you've dealt with plantains enough times, like you're really, really quick about it, you take it apart, right? But there is a lack of buy-in from publishers to give the space. It might just need 1 more minute, right? But like everything is so rigid because it's based, I believe, on cuisines that have very different structures, that are based on very different cooking techniques. And we haven't yet gotten to the place where folks are, where publications are meeting us in the middle, right, and giving the space. And I think that's a major limitation. And another thing, Daniela, that you and I talked about, that I think probably a lot of folks in this room have experienced is also the stress of also the internal pressure from our own communities to get recipes right. And I know I can only imagine how many folks in this room who develop Puerto Rican recipes, who develop recipes from within their cultures, have had moments where they get comments, or I've even heard of cooks who've gotten threats. My good friend Bridget Washington published a recipe for Trinidadian eggplant in Bon Appetit late last year, and just got taken to task by dozens of Trinidadian folk who were just really cruel about how she had prepared her dish. And I myself, in my, I don't read comments as a rule. I had a really good editor who was like, just don't even bother. It's just like, if anybody's going to take the time to write something, it's probably going to be nasty. For my Times piece, for my Times, my essentials, I have an incredible recipe for pernil that's based on Maricel Precia's recipe for pernil. And so it's like my Puerto Rican adobo, but an incredibly trained, talented chef making the best chicharrón I have ever been able to accomplish, with a slightly Cuban take, right? Because Maricel is Cuban. And I found out from someone else that somebody had gone on the Times and had gone on social media also to take me to task about using a naranja agria, which is what I prefer. It's an ingredient that I prefer for my pernil because I just think it's more delicious. I think that it's the flavor that I want in my pernil. And this person was like, that's not an ingredient we use in Puerto Rico. Forgive me. Bullshit. No way. It's like you find the Badia, like naranja agria at the bodegas in Harlem, in Puerto Rico. Like, no, just because your family doesn't use it doesn't mean that it's not being used. And so I think sometimes, and maybe y'all want to chime in on this, like, it just hurts a little bit, right? Because we, you know, it's like we're the ones, we're being expected to represent a very diverse, wide culture. And sometimes I think that the pressure that a lot, the sort of pride and pressure that a lot of Puerto Ricans feel about our cuisine sometimes ends up like coming back to slap us because we didn't make a dish like their abuela made their dish, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree, Vaughn. And the story I keep coming back to, I'll tell it really quickly, but I a few years ago interviewed Samira Nasrat about a recipe, and we were talking about Iranian food, and she was saying that for the last episode in her Netflix show, you know, they had a chance to reshoot it. In the last episode, her mom and her make tahdig, and when they flip it over, it's broken. It's not perfect tahdig. But she wanted it that way in some sense because she knew that no matter how she did it, Iranians were going to come after her and say, you did it wrong. You did it wrong. That's not how you do it. That's not how you cook the rice. And the thing that stuck with me about that conversation with Samin was that what she realized in the critiques she was getting was that whoever we are, whatever culture we're trying to represent, we're under all this pressure to get it right. That as if there's only one right way, right? But no one ever says that about like a hamburger or a hot dog, right? No one ever says like, oh, you know, if you put avocado on this, it's no longer a hamburger. Like that just doesn't exist for the mainstream culture. And Samin's point was that there is this pressure that this pressure comes from within, but it's really the pressures of white supremacy that tell us that we're not able to have the space to have multiple kinds of one dish, that if we have a recipe for tostones, it's the only recipe, that's the one true thing, but that just doesn't exist anywhere else. Even in cultures like Italy or France, where these are things that are, you know, so well documented, those cooks there are still riffing on things, you know? So I think we really need to take a step back as recipe developers, as recipe writers, and particularly in our own communities, and really just support each other because there's room for all of us.
Absolutely. And I think that idea about, everybody else gets to have multiple versions, and everybody else gets to have, even if you're talking about, say on camera, a show can be hosted by 4 white women and nobody would really say anything about it. But it's, maybe 1 Latina, 1 Black woman. Like it's that sort of thing where it's there, it just becomes this thing where you're only allowed one. We're only allowed 1 shot. We're allowed 1 toston recipe a year. We're allowed 1, meanwhile, there's banana bread 50 times a day and chocolate chip cookies and meatloaf. But the pernil comes out 1 time a year by, around Christmas. And it's like, we all take turns, right? Like one of us does it. Like I remember one time I was going to do a coquito recipe and they're like, oh no, Daisy's doing coquito this year. So it's like everybody takes, it's like who gets to do it? Meanwhile, how many margaritas do people, or not margaritas? Well, yeah, margaritas too, because people like margaritas are an American cocktail now. But it's that sort of element of, because we only get 1 shot, so it's almost like we're being forced to compete, and we're being forced to push each other down in to get our own voice heard. When instead of like grabbing at each other, I always describe it as the claw in Toy Story. That it's all those little guys trying to get to the top, and the claw comes down and picks out 1, and then.
I love this analogy so much.
This is how I feel a lot of the time. It's like, oh no, here's the claw's coming from one of us, right? It can only be one of us. But no, it's it's not just 1 claw.
It's also something. Well, this is something. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this is something Vaughn and I talked about. This talk. I want to give credit to Vaughn. She. This was her idea, and I was just so excited when she brought it up to me. And then when we said, we're going to need someone to moderate, we had a list of more than a dozen people. We were like, there's so many, we really wanted to share this platform. And I think, this will be the first of many conversations. But yeah, I love that we're able to do this, have this conversation.
Absolutely. So another thing that we talked about was recipes, right? And essentially, do we even need recipes? Because I think a lot of our cultures are very sort of oral traditions. A lot of the recipes that we got are, it's un poquito de esto, a little bit of this, just until it's spicy. If there's more people, you can do like, right? It's like, it's a different, it's very casual, just like the same way we give directions, right? Like, oh, la esquina. But, so but again, we're existing within this format where to tell these stories, we need a language that is universal and that people can understand. So I want to talk a little bit about your perspectives. Daniela, you're a longtime recipe developer. So how do you feel about recipes? How do you feel about the structure of a recipe in telling, telling the story of a dish?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit, just that I'm trying to make it something that feels true to me, something that tastes right. And I think even if you can't get all of the right ingredients, even my Iranian mom, she learned how to cook Puerto Rican food from my grandmother. And when I'm making it, she can smell when it's right or when it's not right. Like she can tell. And there are a host of ingredients that you might need to substitute. A lot of people substitute paprika for the annatto. A lot of people substitute, I think we talked about bell peppers in the ají dulce. Actually my father never made, I don't recall him making sofrito, even though for Vaughn, it's this essential foundation to Puerto Rican cooking. But he just chopped a lot of onions and peppers and threw them in the pot. Maybe we didn't have a food processor. I don't know what the deal was, but so even if you don't have sofrito, you still got to have those ingredients in the final dish, right? And so I'm looking to achieve the end result. How I get there is going to be this kind of hodgepodge of research, of talking to as many people as I know, talking to my relatives, of course, but also talking to my editors. I think they have a really smart perspective in certainly how other people will perceive the recipes and how to keep it consistent, so that, if someone's reading a recipe for banana bread, let's say, and then they come to my recipe, they're not going to be so thrown off. They're going to say, oh, I can follow this. I understand it. That goes, I think there's a good and bad to that. That goes back to some of your points, Alejandra. But I think, and I want to hear from Vaughn, because I know that your cookbook was really I think, conceived to preserve recipes. And I think that, that fits in like one space and time. But as we continue to do this work, as more of us do this work, hopefully, that body of work will continue to build, that representation will build.
Definitely. And I also want to hear a little more from Alejandra about what she doesn't like about recipes, because again, there's space for all of us, right? There's no one way to cook by any stretch of the imagination. I have come to see recipes, I think, in a very different light as a result of being a food scholar and being sort of really embedded in cultural anthropology. Recipes are an archive, right? They are an archive that that communicates so much about a culture and a history. The way that techniques are written, the ingredients, the amounts that are used, these are all things that tell a story, right? And so recipes exist as a can exist, right, as a foundational archive that holds within it a history and a story, right? And I think that, those of us who have read Tony Tipton Martin's The Jemima Code, right, can understand, sorry, my dog is like, please let me into the space, can really understand how critical it is that the work of recipe preservation be happening. It's not sort of a judgment of use it or not. I mean, Lord knows, like I barely use a recipe on the day-to-day, right? I know how I like to cook. I know the ingredients that I like to use, but I love cooking from recipes and I love cookbooks. And I think a really important point to bring up about la comida puertorriqueña is that until the turn of the 20th century, Puerto Rican cuisine was not being documented by anyone, right? And we know this from food historians. In many ways, some of the dishes that are sort of most celebrated in Puerto Rico, mofongo, for example, which is plantains that are deep fried, smashed, often with chicharrón and garlic, and then formed into a ball, right? Easily one of the most iconic dishes of Puerto Rican cuisine, right? Until really the middle of the 20th century, and I think some food historians would say even more recently, mofongo was a food that was associated with Blackness. It was associated with poverty. It was not a food for which there were recipes. It was not food that was necessarily served, right? Like at a DK restaurant. And now it's like quite fine dining, right? And so there is a process began to happen where foodways were documented, and then more foodways were documented, and then more foodways were documented, right? And through this process, we have at the very least about 100, 150 years of information about the formation of a culture in Puerto Rico through the recipes and through what they reveal. Even the way that recipes are described reveal so much about people and culture, the individuality of a chef, right? And so I really come to recipes now in understanding that they are multifaceted, that they are layered. To Daniela's point, they should be well written. I am all about sort of standardization when it comes to recipes, because when you write a bunch of recipes, you understand that the reason why the ingredients are in a certain order is because that's how you work from them, right? And that is just a very kind, generous thing that you do for the cook. Because like, if, looking back and forth, ingredient to process, you're chopping, things are hot, things are sizzling, right? Like how can we help you get it right? How can we help you make sure it tastes good? And so I think it's really layered, and I think it's incredibly valuable. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful to see so many like Puerto Rican recipes out in the world. I mean, y'all, I think probably a lot of people in the audience would agree. It is like 10 to 20 times the amount of Puerto Rican food floating around in our world as there was 10 years ago. And I just think that that's really awesome.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of, because you were asking me what my thoughts are, I have a love-hate relationship with recipes. And I think part of that just has to do with me and my way of being. I'm a very, and I know I saw Reina in the chat mention that intuitive cooking is what makes our food so special. Reina, yes, that I am an intuitive cook. And I am a very sort of, I have a friend of mine, Shauna, says I'm a reckless cook, which I love. Like I want to improvise. I want to have fun with it. And I think that that's a lot of times hard for me to capture in a recipe because it's so based on my taste, and my taste may not be your taste. I think Alicia Kennedy actually said something about that. Like when you cook exactly what a recipe is, but you don't really put any of your own personalization into it, your own taste into it. Like if it says 1 teaspoon of salt and you're like, that seems like it might be too salty, but you follow it anyway without listening to your instinct. That's where things go wrong. So it's for me, I'm okay with the recipe, but I want there to also be some sort of, what's about the teaching part, right? It's that structure part about encouraging people to be intuitive, encouraging people to taste and to touch. And I want people to not follow my recipes. Like I want them to break the rules. I want them to change things up, to say, actually, you know what? I don't like it this way. Like I want that. I don't want to hear the comments directly to me. I like, just do that personally yourselves. Like I don't need to hear the details of it, but I do want people to have that sort of freedom and to feel that sort of freedom. And I think a lot of times people can think recipes are, very like prescriptive and very limiting. And I don't like limitations. But I understand that, there needs to be a way to get that story across. So it's a love-hate. It's a love-hate thing, but, just like anything else. So I do want to make sure that we allow for some time for questions at the end. But before we get into that, I did have one more thing that I wanted to talk about, because I think this would be kind of a good way to sort of button the conversation up. So we talked a little bit about the challenges, about the things that we love, the things we like, what we've been able to do. What do you think needs to change for you to be able to fully tell your story in its most like juicy, authentic, fantastic self? What do you think? What needs to change? Like pie in the sky, whatever you want, big dreams. What do you need?
Oh, gosh, I'll keep it brief, because I do really want to hear from y'all in the audience. I've been watching the chat just move, and there are some really brilliant folks in the audience who think about this stuff all the time, and I want to hear from y'all. But I very simply, two things. Daniela and I and Alejandra, we are all light-skinned Latinas who live on the mainland, right? We should not be expected to be speaking for the island. And something that I have been thinking about a lot is that I think that there's a lot of misconception about Puerto Ricans, and I think that people often overlook the fact that como Puerto Rico is a US territory, that means that people on the island are often completely fluent in English, right? And so we need to be cultivating talent on the island. I want to see publishers looking for writers on the island and making space for them, and taking the time to cultivate a writer who maybe isn't as experienced, who maybe isn't accustomed to writing for the Times or the Post or any other publication. I want to see that kind of effort, because it'll make a huge difference. And then you'll be actually hearing from people on the island who, again, are part of the United States, right? Those of us on the diaspora and on the island, we are one, right? But we have very, very different experiences. And even those of us within the diaspora, it depends on where you grew up, right? The other thing that I wanted to point out specifically is, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, at some point over the last couple weeks, Yewande Komofe at the New York Times posted a recipe that was so beautiful and brilliant to me. And it was a recipe for a shrimp and okra with sazon. And when I saw her recipe, I knew that she was using my sazon recipe that came from my New York Times Essentials, right? And so I was like, okay, so my sazon is now in the collection. And Yewande, who is an incredible chef, who's a brilliant person, right, has all of these tools at her disposal. She's Nigerian. West African cuisine is so connected to Puerto Rican cuisine, is so connected to Southern cuisine, right? And in this one dish, you see Nigeria to Puerto Rico to the south, just in one dish, right? And on top of that, it looked beautiful and brilliant, and I want to eat it. And I want to see more of that. That's what I would like to see more of, is people getting to play with ingredients, not because they're from a certain place, but because it's in their arsenal. Right? And we should all, no matter where we're from, if we're good cooks, we should get to play in the same way that white cooks get to make food from wherever they want to make food, right? So that's what I would like to see change.
I love that. Daniela,
I can only echo that. again, when we were putting this talk together, we thought of so many people that could speak to the diaspora, that could speak to life on the island. Not everyone was available. It was crucial to us that we, and I think there are a couple of people on the call that we'd love to hear from too. And so, we're really wanting to make sure that there's as much space as possible for as many voices as possible, and that that we continue to support each other. I think that we definitely don't want to, this actually, I think this is something, Alejandra, you talked about, like not wanting to essentialize the Latinx community. I think we probably all know people that still think, Puerto Ricans have tacos as part of their as part of their cuisine. We know people who think,
right, or think our food is very spicy. Or
yes. There are a lot of misconceptions about it, and it's always puzzling to me that, like, as a country, we know so much more about Mexico, for example. Clearly incredible cuisine, incredible culture, but not actually part of the United States, right? So, like, in some ways, it's very spiritually part of the United States. But I think it's a frustration for me, and I love all of our communities. But I want to make sure that there's space for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love the idea. Definitely stop essentializing. Don't try to book me a Puerto Rican for your Cinco de Mayo segments or brand campaigns. And I think also, I think one of the things we've noticed, I think, was it yesterday even? This has been a long week, but it was the Gordon Ramsay in Puerto Rico making what he seemed to genuinely believe was pegao. And he was so excited about it. He was just like, he said beautiful 22 times. I counted. I wanted to know how many times, because everything was beautiful. The local pepper was beautiful. It was a very non-specific spicy chorizo, a spicy Puerto Rican sausage. And I was like, what is this spicy Puerto Rican sausage? Like, I love sausage. I'm Puerto Rican, and I don't know what you're talking about, sir. He never talked about flavors. He never talked about flavor profiles or anything other than just things being sort of generally beautiful. And it was this frustration, especially as a woman who a chef, a Puerto Rican TV host, who tries for so many opportunities and gets turned down or has these limitations put on me, seeing a white male celebrity chef who just gets to do whatever the heck he wants, and badly and poorly. And the way that now he's got this huge audience that is seeing him and thinks this is pegao. And when it was this weird mix of like arroz manpostao and like a caballo and like arroz con pollo and like Chinese fried rice, like it was this like what like it
and
was
also like
whole...
what were all the herbs on the eggs?
Oh,
like where on
it was
earth
like,
does that even come from? It was
a confusion of cilantro.
Yeah. There was so many, I just didn't know where he was going with it at some point. Yeah.
So wild. And I actually watched the whole, because I'm working on a story about it for NBC, and I watched the whole 1 hour episode of his show Uncharted, which is what this was a little offshoot from. And I was like, maybe if I watch the show, I'm going to see him at a restaurant or see something that he ate or tasted or learned that caused this confusion in his head. But no, all that I saw was 1 hour of all men. It was the only chef that was named was Jose Enrique, who wonderful, fantastic, but oh my God, there are other chefs. No queer voices, no women, no trans chefs. There's so many incredible people doing incredible, innovative things on the island. They were not there. There was one woman, a farmer, Souley, who showed up for about 4 minutes at the 30th minute, because I was like waiting for a woman. I was like, this, and you said, Vaughn, when you said earlier that the story of your book was a story of women. So many of us, we learned our recipes from mamas, abuelas, Diaz. This is who really has been making pegao. This is who makes pegao. So I was like, no wonder this man does not know how to make pegao, because he hasn't talked to a single woman in this entire trip. He's just been rappelling down mountains and jumping out of helicopters and talking to Robbie Draco Rosa from Menudo about coffee. And he's completely missed out on this perspective. And it was this sort of thing where it was like, I would never have done that. Vaughn would never have done that. Daniela, and all these incredible Puerto Ricans that I know would never have done that. And that's what happens when you give the mic to people who don't have that same perspective.
I wanna touch on that too, though, because I think that that's true, but I want to go back to a point that Vaughn was making, which is that, I think the reason we're disappointed in this Gordon Ramsay segment was because he clearly has an incredible budget. He has people that work on a research team, are able to report for him. We expect more from someone like that because they have the resources. They have the resources we don't have, right? And so when a mistake like that is made, a misrepresentation of our culture, it's not just that he's a white man, it's that he had access, it's that he could have done better. And so, but I want to say that
he could have called Alejandra and asked her how to make pegao.
Yeah, exactly.
She ain't hard to find.
We're not hiding in the shadows. Like we're talking about this all the time. And to that end, I want to shout out a coworker of mine, a colleague, Aaron Hutcherson, I think maybe on this call. He actually pitched a story for Puerto Rican potato salad. And I was just like, yes, I love this. I love that he's doing this. I love that, and he went out and he talked to me, but obviously I told him, I said, you've got to talk to other Puerto Ricans. We're all going to have an opinion about it.
We're talking tomorrow.
We're all going to criticize it and pick it apart. But that's not the point. The point is that, good reporting can really carry you through. Good reporting, the right kind of research. You can write about anything you're interested in. I fully believe that. You don't have to be from the culture, but you do have to show respect to it.
Well, and maybe not to take your role, Alejandra, but maybe we can move into questions now. And you're
yes,
you're the one.
Absolutely,
picking,
I'm going through, and I see a lot of passion. Which is exactly what I wanted from here. As someone suggested, an Alejandra versus Gordon throwdown. That was another thing of the show. It ended with a throwdown against Jose Enrique, and he won, of course. Oh God, I can't. Don't watch the show, but if you guys watch the show, DM me because I want to bitch about it. I'm looking for questions, but I'm just seeing a lot of incredible comments. If you guys have a question, drop it in the chat right now. Let's see. There's one from Alfredo who said, Vaughn, in your book, you write you're not excited about rice, even though you're a Puerto Rican. I'm the same way. I'm not a huge rice person. And I do not like beans. Is that part of the reason why you didn't do arroz con pollo? Is that because you're not partial to rice?
I think this is multi-answered, and my mom, who's in the space, can maybe attest to this and remember this. I actually think that this is something deeply biological for me. My body doesn't really like a lot of sugar. Rice makes me really full, pasta makes me really full, bread makes me really full. And so over the years, as I've become a more intuitive eater, my ideal ratio is así de arroz y así de beans, right? I want 3/4 bean and a little sprinkle of rice, because ultimately I love protein in all of its forms, but I just don't get excited about starches. So, but to your question, I think something that is hard, I think when you're developing a collection of recipes, is that you have to choose what is your rubric, right? And my next cookbook is 100 recipes from islands all over the world. Y'all, don't even get me started. The rubric is I still don't even know. But the number one thing that I go on is, if it's my book, I need to want to cook everything in the book, and I need to like to eat everything in the book, because it's my book, right? If somebody else wants to write books full of food that they don't like to eat, yeah, dale. But if it's my book, and the other thing that I should say, which is actually the truth, and my mom can attest to this, y'all, I'm really bad at cooking rice. And that is the ultimate truth. For some reason, no me queda aguado. It's always really watery. But I think there's a correlation here, right? I think that I don't make good rice because I don't really care for it, And so I've never pero look, pernil all day long, I will make y'all a carne guisado that will make you call home. You know what I mean? But don't I have a rice cooker, and that hooks my rice up. So anyway, thank you for your question.
We have another question here. I'm always am I muted or not? Is anyone looking into researching the intersectionality merging of Puerto Rican food cultures with other foods? for example, oh, the chat's moving. For example, I'm half Puerto Rican and half Cajun. My parents merged cooking styles and it's incredible. Well, Daniela, maybe you have thoughts on that one.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Sure. So is anyone looking into or researching the intersectional merging of Puerto Rican food culture with other foods?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fascinating thing, and I mean, I'm personally interested in it, but I can't say that I know of any specifically cookbooks. I mean, what I know of is sort of like what Vaughn's book is like, you know, where she grew up in the South, and that's a very specific cuisine as well. And you know, I think of like her is it coconut cream collards or is it coconut cream spinach? I can't remember now, but it's like green, yeah, coconut cream collards, just like the title of the book. And it's, you know, it like that is something to me that I could see people making on the island. Collards, which is something I associate with the South. And so I think it's something that maybe anyone that's writing a book that's really personal to them, that's not just looking to document the cuisine, is going to have recipes like that. And so they're worth seeking out.
Well, and something I would love to add, and thank you for that, Daniela, is that as I'm working on this, on my next book, which again is about the cuisines of islands, specifically warm weather islands all over the world, something that I'm noticing, which is something that I think, and Daniela, I think maybe this probably resonates with you, something that I started to play with when I was working on coconuts and collards, is that Puerto Rican food is actually pretty simple, right? Sofrito has onions, garlic, peppers, cilantro, culantro, right? Sazon is a really kind of basic onion powder, garlic powder, cumin, coriander, you know, like achote. These are not crazy wild ingredients, right? And what I've found is that oftentimes, if you think about what some of the core ingredients are to a Puerto Rican dish, and then you just put it alongside another cuisine that uses that as a core ingredient. For example, cumin is one of the few spices that we use very often in Puerto Rican cuisine. It's in sazon, it's in adobo, it's in all kinds of stuff, right? And so a lot of times, like, I like to play with mixing things. Like my favorite, one of my favorite ways to make barbecue is I mix berbere, which is from Northeast Africa, with sazon and fresh orange juice and fresh garlic, and the combination is freaking delicious.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so good.
It's really, really good. And I don't know why they work, but it's because there are foundational ingredients to both of these spice blends that love each other, right? And what I'm finding in these foods all over the world is like, you really can mix and match, because our cuisine in many ways has can be very simple. You know, sometimes the process is complex, but a lot of times the ingredients themselves are not that difficult or complicated.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going through. We've got like a minute, but I'm going to call it a Puerto Rican minute, and so it's going to be a few minutes. So Reina, in response to the question earlier, said, I've been sharing recipes about Puerto Rican food and Gullah Geechee food. The similarities between the two cultures are insane. A lot of fun exploring here in Charleston. So check out what Reina's working on at Sofrito Project. Absolutely, that's really fantastic. I also know I love what Eric Rivera does with a lot of his fusion with his restaurants, and he's always, everything he posts on Twitter, I'm like, oh my God, I like it's, my likes are just Eric's food photos. But I saw that he's working on like an Italian food thing that he's calling cabron, and it's like very like a carbone twist, and he's marrying those two things, which just sounds fantastic to me. So I really do love seeing that. And I feel like along those lines, I think a lot of us do it. I think it's what we all do naturally, right? Like I think I add my Puerto Rican flavors to everything. I do my pernil like pernil style, but then I'll like swap in different ingredients based on what I have there. So I've done it with like Thai ingredients or, you know, things like that. So it's, you just kind of mix and match. So I think while it may not be like we may not be like specifically researching or doing it. I think a lot of us just intuitively end up adding these flavors that we grew up with into the things that we do, right? We might add a little sazon to some burgers, or we might, you know, like mix and match with, like, I love like doing like a guava barbecue sauce or a guava ketchup and things like that, where you just kind of mix and match those flavors. I think a lot of us do this intuitively. And I think that something that I'd love to see is giving ourselves the permission to do that, giving ourselves the permission to explore and to have fun with these recipes and with these ingredients, and not feeling like we have to stick to the recipe. Like I said, break those rules, go wild, go reckless. But I think that that's how we perhaps that's how we expand, and perhaps that's how we kind of take ownership of things, and we get that power to have fun and not have it be, you know, that just one shot sort of idea. So before we head off into the night, or the afternoon, wherever you are, maybe you guys can each have some parting words. Daniela, if you want to share something before we head out.
Sure, yeah, just really quickly. I think someone asked a question of other Puerto Rican writers or food writers we should be following, someone up and coming, underrated or beloved, your pick. I want to shout out Alicia Kennedy, her newsletter you should all be subscribing to. Ileana Masonette has a great newsletter, Eat Gore to Eat, also on Substack. I just like lost my train of thought. Luz Cruz, who I don't think has a newsletter, but I'm dropping the Twitter link there, their Twitter link there. I got to work with them when I was at Serious Eats, and I love the intersection of agriculture, the information related to agriculture that they bring to their research and writing. And there are so many, I'm forgetting now because I didn't write this down after I considered that question, but I'll stick with that for now.
We'll add some in because I know there's going to be like a wrap up email that goes out tomorrow. So we'll definitely we'll send Sari our picks and we'll make sure that you guys get some great references and books and people to check out to kind of keep the conversation going.
The only other person I would add who I think was in this space is Alicia Miranda, who doesn't just write about Puerto Rican food by any stretch of the imagination, is a journalist and writes about all sorts of things. Quite a brilliant writer, awesome to follow on social media. And sorry, thank you. I think that the last thing I would say is really just gratitude for all of y'all. You know, I mean, I didn't shout out Reina a moment ago because Reina has been in conversation with us all night, and I'm so grateful for that, right? Like we actually have such a tremendous community of writers and folks that are starting to come out in this space, and I'm incredibly grateful to all of y'all for showing up and spending, you know, your just before dinner or just after dinner time with us. Please follow Daniela's newsletter, follow Alejandra, say prayers for getting Alejandra to have her own show, because we all want to see her have her own show. Don't you want to see Alejandra have her own show? And I would love for y'all to, you know, to follow me on Instagram. Instagram is really the only place where I spend any time. But over the next few months, I'm going to be sharing a lot of my recipe development from this island cuisine that I'm working towards, and it's really remarkable and interesting and layered with history. So thank y'all so much for being here and for spending this time with us. Alejandra, Daniela, Reinas, like thank y'all for just being such wonderful thought partners.
Amazing. Thank you all. Yes, I mean, echoing what everyone has already said, this has been it's been a wonderful hour, and I've done so many of these Zoom panels and things over the past year, and I feel like there's just like a certain heart that came here, and there were so many people that signed up, and there was just such enthusiasm and passion and you know, sharing and excitement. So we love that, and don't worry guys, we're already playing that part 2 and part 3, and we want to do an in-person one. So we will see you all in person hopefully next time. Thank you again. We'll keep that conversation going, and we will be sending out that message tomorrow so you guys can have all those wonderful resources. Thank you. Have a wonderful, beautiful night. Sending love.
Ciao.